Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to SGInnovate tonight. We're going to be talking about, I hope, something that's important to you, and the fact that you're here, I think, makes it important. We're talking about this idea of employability, and I know that there's always a discussion on what do we have to learn in terms of skills, and what are employers looking for, and what do we mean by employability. And I want to get into the idea of what does education mean in terms of employability. So we've got some really great people that are going to be joining us tonight. And what I'd like to do is just set the stage briefly. For those that have not been to SGInnovate before, our mission is simple. We try to help capable men and women build deep tech companies. All right, so science with an IP core, meaning out of a PhD research in many cases. We almost always try to give as much help as we can to entrepreneurs or scientist entrepreneurs from within Singapore, because that's our mission. And what we try to do is investable grants. We're not free money. We help them with equity and go on and raise a fund so that they can build a company. And we try to be helpful to them any way we can. And part of what we do at this space and our other space up by Block 79 is to have events where people get to know each other, mix and mingle. And out of this group, there will be people with a wide range of experiences, and ideally, people that can go on to see how to be helpful to each other. If nothing else, we simply want to encourage discussion and debate. We never try and say this is the right answer or not. We just say, here's something you should take into account. So really, the quality of the discussion depends in large part on you and whether you choose to engage and ask questions. So Slido is there. You don't have to stand up and do anything awkward. Just ask your question. It's my job to try and put it to our panelists. And what I try to do is make it authentic, so we don't have any questions that we've tried to imagine with easy discussion answers in advance. I haven't shared the questions that are on my mind. I've only shared the general context of where I'd like the conversation to go with our panelists. So really engage and help me make the evening a good use of your time. First things first, we always like to memorialize these events because they're important to us. So for those that have been here, you know the drill. Please stand up, and we're going to have a teammate take a picture. If you don't feel comfortable being captured, look away, because we're going to go ahead and smile at the camera. And I've got my 4 panelists that are going to be in the front row with me. So everybody stand up, please. Okay, everybody can see okay? All right, give us a 1, 2, 3, Jeff. All right, there you go. So now it's captured for posterity and for history. Okay, what I'm going to do is go ahead and introduce Kelvin, Jessica, Ved, and Jonathan. And so what I'm going to do, hey, thank you for sitting under your photo, so that makes it awesome and easy. So my whole idea here is not to try and introduce people through a long and extensive bio, because I don't like to have that done, and I don't like to do that to people. So what I'm going to do is just introduce the team enough to say, please start. They'll share whatever they want to put their own work into context, and then off we go. So Kelvin, do you want to kick us off?
Hi everybody, I'm Kelvin from the Singapore Economic Development Board, EDB. Been with EDB for about 23 years, so it's a long time. Been through the whole works about working through with companies, and currently I'm looking after most of the efforts in human capital development, so which just kind of explains why I'm here.
Okay, John?
Hi everyone, so I'm Jono. It's the way we shorten every name in Australia. And
how many people know Australian men that don't have an O at the end of their name, right? So anybody know an Australian guy without an O? So John, as I refer to him, or Jono, please.
Anything works. So I'm the admissions director at General Assembly. So I've been with GA for about 5 years now, right from when we were a small startup through to late last year when we were acquired by one of the largest staffing firms in the world. So my job as admissions director, so my team basically handles all the inbound inquiries. So we're pretty much answering this question on a daily basis, talking to thousands of people who want to know how to upskill themselves and basically future-proof their careers.
Jess?
Is this working? Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. So my name is Jess. I am the global head of HR for Palo IT. I joined Palo IT 3 years ago when we were a tiny company in Singapore. Still remember the office on Board Key and the toilet, which was terrible. Now we have about 500 people working for us worldwide, and my job basically is to rethink the way we do things when it comes to people and workforce engagement.
Hi, my name is Ved. I'm part of the global talent acquisition at Alibaba. I help in terms of growing our businesses across 13 countries. One of my deep interest topic is talent. I mean, I look at solving some talent problems for departments, companies, organizations, so that's my passion. I've been a tech recruiter all along, so I've done tech recruiting right from GE to Cisco to Juniper to Google, and now at Alibaba. So that's me.
Okay, so for those that haven't already thought about it, one of our great friends and partners here in Singapore is General Assembly. And so what I'd like to do is go ahead and ask John the first question, since you are helping us bring this event and bringing it right to people's mind. When you think about, because one of the questions we already have on Slido, is there a list of skills that you sort of have as your, yep, I've heard that question 25 times, you need to do these 3 things, or is it more nuanced depending on each individual?
I think it's probably more nuanced depending on the individual. That being said, I think I can give you some context around how GA goes about deciding on what subjects we teach, right? So we put a lot of research into what companies need, what skills gap is out there, and then basically build our curriculum around that. So everything you see on the GA product suite, so things like user experience design, software engineering, data science, all of those I think are going to be pretty safe for the future, but they're not going to be for everyone. So I'm not saying that everyone should go out there and be a software engineer. You should really try and find something that you like first and foremost. Has anyone here ever tried to teach themselves how to code? Just kind of raise your hand. Okay, and now keep your hand up if you really enjoyed it and you can see yourself coding day in, day out for the rest of your life. Right. So only a few.
Quick, have you already met John?
So it's definitely not for everyone, right? But I think if you're to specialize, that's probably a safe way to go. But for everyone else, I do think that people need like a base level of digital literacy these days. So you're going to be working much closer with software engineers and with user experience designers. I do believe everyone needs to have a little bit of experience across everything and kind of understand it. If there was one skill, I'd say, that people should take away and is probably going to be part of their jobs in the future, it would be data analysis. Working with data, using data to make better business decisions. I don't know of a role at the moment, and I'm sure there's going to be more roles in the future where data isn't going to be a big part of it.
Okay. Let me continue to think about some of these things. We'll circle back in and around. But Kelvin, since you're leading parts of the EDB, and the EDB focuses a lot of energy and effort on building the economy in Singapore, how does the EDB in general, or how do you as a leader think about this idea of employment or employability? Because it's a key question for Singapore's future, that there's high value and increasingly higher value types of roles for citizens. How do you think about this big topic of employment and employability?
Well, so like you said, it's a very big topic. I think demographically we are saying that the profile of residents in Singapore increasingly, the jobs that we need to create here in this economy is increasingly all have to be professionals, managers, and engineers alike. So I think that kind of set the tone or the kind of target that we have to aim in terms of the kind of industries, kind of investments that we need to promote in Singapore. But I think whether is it in coding or in the areas of Industry 4.0, I think what we are really seeing is that the skills and the technologies are changing so quickly that we talked about briefly just now, that it's really we're going to really need to build a culture across the entire the entire nation, a culture of continuous upgrading, skills training, and re-equipping. I mean, just take, for example, Industry 4.0. I mean, as a movement, it's been around over the last 3 years, maybe 3-4 years. But when we poll, but most of the universities in that time, they don't really have any ready programs for Industry 4.0. And then when we poll the different companies, everybody have their own different versions of Industry 4.0. So if you fast forward today, 3 years later, there are about 300 to 500 different programs in Singapore offering Industry 4.0 training, but yet at the same time, we are hearing from different industry verticals that those training programs are not sufficient for the different industry verticals. So it's fast evolving, the requirements are changing all the time. So on one hand, we need to really build a new culture across the people, in our people, that there's a need to continuously upgrade ourselves. On the other hand, we are also thinking about how do we kind of get the companies to play a bigger part. Because I think the companies are in the best position to look at your own employees, to say that, hey, look, these are the new skills that the companies need to acquire for them to be able to capture a bigger market share in the next few years. So they have access to the people, they are able to assess which of them they are able to, what kind of infrastructure they can put in place to continuously upgrade the people. So those are the things that we're trying to change in Singapore.
All right, I want to come back to something that you just said there, but let me go to Jess first. So Jess, I hate to do this to you because I know we have this sort of awkwardly not correctly balanced panel, but thankfully you can help us think about this issue. There's been amazing role models. I'll use the expression role models. I think of Margaret Hamilton. So for those that are fans of things that have to do with NASA, Margaret Hamilton wrote, along with her team, some of the lunar landing module software for Apollo 11. Katie Bowman recently with some of the algorithms around trying to stitch together images for the black hole detection. So there's lots of amazing women that have been outstanding leaders in their field. Sometimes we hear this thing of, we need more role models to attract more young women into STEM and so on. You see a lot of people that you have a chance to work with. Are there words of advice or perspective that you can help offer? How can we get closer? Because we need great skills to build companies. Selfishly, as SGInnovate, we need great people to build startups. How can we do a better job on having more great women involved in that journey of being a founder, or any aspect you'd like to take?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a question we do get a lot being in technology, which is, okay, we don't have enough people to fill the jobs, but on top of that, we don't have enough women to take on those jobs. And either you sit and you wait for the next generation of developers or data analysts to come out of university, which is going to be 20 years from now, or either you have a different approach, which is the responsibility of every single company out there, which is on proactivity, which means that you need to go and educate the parents on why it is important to get the little girls to be interested in data or AI or machine learning and so on. And then you look at the issue tackling the school. So you go as a company and you talk to little girls in school and tell them about the great careers they can get working in IT. But then also you extend the same benefits to male in organizations. Maternity leave, it should be paternity leave the same equal amount of time for male as well. So meaning that male will be in a position to give more space to women within the industry to develop skills for the same period of time as well. So the same chances goes both ways, not just for female employees, but for male employees as well. But I think the biggest problem usually is just to recognize that, okay, we have a problem, then we will wait for universities to be able to bring the next generation on for us to hire. But the reality is it doesn't fit the economy, it doesn't fit the need, and it doesn't fit what we need today. So this is why GA, as an example, has been unbundling education, providing skills fast to the market, and that's something we do appreciate within the space of being in technology. But I would say for organization looking at hiring talents, whether male or female, is to make sure you recognize that there is a problem, and based on that, to extend the same chances to male or female you would be interviewing and obviously employing within the organization.
Okay, thank you. Ved, let me pick up on what Jess has just said and ask you a question here. Are you a believer? I'll say, forget your company for the moment. I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of the company. Are you a believer in the importance of quota? Because sometimes people will say, well, the only way to try and move closer to some appropriate balance is we just mandate that there must be this many % on a board, this many % in senior management, blah, blah, blah. Some people say, no, that's not fair to anybody. We want to encourage and challenge, but we don't want to have a specific quota. Do you have a perspective since you live in this sort of recruiting space?
So this is my personal opinion again. So when you get quota into anything, you are curtailing innovation, curtailing rightful thinking, curtailing freedom. So if you want innovation to happen, if you want problems to be solved as a business leader, you really need to empower them. It's a guidance. You give them guidance rather than give a quota. I mean, if you look at some of the great companies, the men to women ratios are quite great in the business side of things. When it comes to engineering or tech, the men to women ratios are quite lower. So how do you build that from beginning? I mean, you'll have to get interest developed into women engineers, at least get some really good women engineers out there in the market and bring them to the industry. So that's something which I would say, if you get quota, I mean, you're basically cutting the freedom and independence to innovate.
So I always like to try and take audience feedback. I'm just going to ask a straw poll survey. Are you in favor, as individuals, forget your company alliance, are you in favor that the right way forward to strive to a level of greater equality is through quota? So I'm just going to make it a sort of yes-no question. So yes, in favor of quota? Okay. Otherwise, meritocracy, right? I mean, best people, best role. I think the important point is, how can we do a better job presenting and communicating and sharing, because there are some great things happening. We just need people to perhaps know more about them. One of the questions that comes up, I'm going to have to arrow you on this one. How competitive are Singaporeans compared to FT? In terms of, just as a general, I don't know the origination of the question. Competitive means like, competitive kiasu, or competitive is in, right skills compared to others. But the general question, how competitive are Singaporeans when compared to foreign talent?
No, I think we are. I think the first problem that we are having to solve is that there's not enough of us. There's not enough Singaporeans, right? that's the
Reclaim some more.
Yeah. So that's the very first problem that we are needing to solve. I mean, it's not just a problem for the tech space. It's a problem for the entire nation, right? If we don't, I mean, as a city, it's understandable that we are not reproducing ourselves fast enough or enough. So as a society, we need to think about where do we want to be, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. I mean, we can't disappear. It's going to be terrible. I mean, we don't want all young kids or feeling that actually this is a very old place to be in and it's not cool anymore, they leave. So it's terrible, right? So fundamentally, that's the first thing that we need to solve. But otherwise, I mean, Singaporeans, and actually, honestly, because of that thinking, Singapore has always said that we are, open and we welcome talents. We need to. We need to welcome people who will make Singapore their home, who own this place and the future of this place as theirs too. And that's what makes us collectively Singaporeans. And I think in general, from the signals that we're getting from companies, Singaporeans are competitive. I mean, there are many companies who come and invest in Singapore because they are able to find good people here. And like I said, the first fundamental problem that we are having to solve is there's not enough of us.
All right, so let me build on what Kelvin's just said, John, because for sure, having lived in Singapore 18 years myself, and I don't doubt capability, competitiveness, no issue. But in this finite space that companies are now really concentrating on, machine and this broader topic of artificial intelligence or data analysis, if there was a constraint on talent, it's even more pronounced because there's some very exciting companies that the EDB and others have helped anchor in Singapore, but then there's also a high demand from lots of other companies too, right? DBS Bank, Singtel, Singapore Airlines would all love the same talent that Google has. So how do we continue to make sure that we grow this base of professionals that have working skills? Because tonight we're talking about employability.
Well, I actually think Singapore does a really good job of that already, to be honest. So there's we operate in 20 cities around the world, and there's not one place where it's easier to access good quality training. So I think in order to grow the talent pool, you really have to invest in training the next generation. And in terms of getting more women into tech, I think that's also the responsibility of organizations like ours and companies to promote that. So really start to get people interested in careers in this field and grow the talent pool. Like that's really the only way to solve that problem.
Let me just, again, straw poll. How many people that are here tonight expect to even be employed in 2030? Because not everybody's going to be employed 11 or 12 years from now. And I say employed in the context of working for an entity, right? I'd like to juxtapose that against the idea of if you're building your own company, you're working for people, mainly your investors and customers, but the idea of employment, receiving a paycheck from someone. So employed in 2030? So either there's a lot of shy people or half of us are going to be sitting on a beach somewhere relaxing. Okay. Okay. And by the way, just as a quick advertisement, entrepreneurship does not mean, freedom. It's always amazing to me when people say, I'm an entrepreneur, I don't have to work for anyone. The answer is you have to work for a lot of people, called customers and investors and teammates. Let me come back to this concept. We're talking about 2030, so let me keep trying to push the conversation forward versus what do we need on Friday. So when you take a look, one of the questions here, and Jess, I'll just keep throwing this open. What will be the skills of the future? Let me go to you first, Ved, which is not tomorrow. Are you skilled enough to look into the future and say, yep, in 2030, these are the skills?
I think one thing which if I were to say, it's data. So if you are working around data, that's where you are in the right direction. Second thing is automation, a lot of things. So systems are getting really smart. I mean, people are building smarter systems today. So the more smarter systems come online or alive, what you need is for you to build such systems, large-scale systems. The third thing which I would say is cross-platform work. Like if you are building technology, you're trying to not solve one problem all the problems connecting to that solution, that problem area, are your problems. So if you are able to connect and solve for those problems, those are the people who are really employable. Even in 2030, if you're thinking from first principle and then building scalable systems and working on solving some of the industry problems, that's where the industry is headed. So that's my.
So just to build on that, especially in the context not just of what you do today, but as you look at the industry, do you think companies in the future will hire athletes? And by this I mean you don't hire, like today everybody says, you know, give me a job description, HR will go out and recruit against this JD, and then you meet or you don't meet 82%. And AI, everybody's building AI talent matching engines so we can go through 10,000 CVs and pick the most optimized. In the future, will we think about hiring athletes, meaning today you play this position, tomorrow you play that position, because I frankly don't know what I might need from you? Is that where hiring in the future will go? Capable all-arounders or specifically matched, optimized to a defined role? It's just we don't know exactly today what that role might look like.
Yeah, I really like this reason. Sorry, let me just put this down. It's really hard to be fat. So I like the reasoning of what will happen in the future in terms of jobs. And I like to base it on the Moore's law, which basically says that every 2 years, the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit doubles. So it basically says that the power of technology and computers doubles every year. But at the same time, the prices of phones, except iPhone, and computers go down. And so if you use this as a base for projection of what it's going to mean in the future to hone a certain type of skills, I would say you don't know, and you're probably right. For the next 10 years, those are the skills we should definitely get. My perception is a little bit different. I think we still have probably 10, 15 good years again, when technology is not going to replace us as human beings in our jobs. However, people having the knowledge, especially in AI or machine learning or NLP, people understanding the concept and being able to apply them will be replacing us if we don't make the effort, especially in HR, to get those skills. So it's crazy to think that 10 years from now or 15 years from now, you will manage just fine not having or having a vague understanding of what technology means. So everybody should really hurry and learn about it, especially the younger generation, but they're on track. It's more of a concern for us. But yes, I would say understanding that everything you know today, based on Moore's law, you will have to unlearn. So the ability to unlearn everything you know, it's probably something that's going to be extremely useful, but basing everything you will be doing on the fact that technology will be part of it, and you have to have an in-depth understanding, not on everything, it's impossible, but being curious and making sure that you understand the job you have today is very unlikely it's going to be the same job 5 years from now. But if you are willing to be cross-functional in your skills, and again, this ability to unlearn what you have learned in school or in previous companies, that's really key in the future of work.
So picking up on what Jess was saying, John, the idea, some people think that the best way to defeat themselves being replaced by AI, just to set the stage, some people say, well, the best way for me to not be replaced is I'm going to be the most amazing specialist in my domain. Other people would argue, well, specialized areas, narrowly defined areas, are actually those that lend themselves to AI in many cases, not all cases. So when you take a look at the people with whom you're working, do you encourage a breadth of capabilities, or do you say, I want you to go data science 101, 201, 301, 401, 501, and be the most amazing data scientist? Think breadth, depth, both? How do you think about this idea of being ready for 10 years from now?
I think it could work both ways, right? I think if you're highly specialized in a field like data science and automation, right? And you're ahead of the curve, and that's going to be really hard to be that good and stay ahead of the curve. I think you're okay. I actually think the other side of this, right, is that the skills that are going to be more important and make you more employable, they don't necessarily have to be tech, right? All the automation, if we're scared of the robots taking our jobs, right, just be more human. So, do things that robots can't do, or do things that automation can't solve for. So that's where I think soft skills, things like being empathetic, having purpose and passion, all those kinds of things that, unless someone's working on an AI empathetic robot, anyone in the room, I'm not sure. I think you don't want to discount that side of things. That's going to be, highly valued in 10 years' time. So yeah, I think we're not all doomed to lose our jobs to automation. Automation should really free up more room for those high value tasks. So I think of the story of ATMs, right? Automatic teller machines. At the time when these were going to be rolled out, everyone thought all the bank tellers are going to lose their jobs. Banks are going to close down. We're just going to be using these machines. What actually happened when they rolled it out is the banks were saving so much money, not having people handle these everyday mundane tasks, that they opened more branches and hired more people, and that they were just doing different jobs. So they were doing things like, solving customer problems or upselling products. So I think we've got to, it's not all doom and gloom. Like, I think there's that side of things as well.
All right. I'm sort of there with you, and I'm sort of not. So let me just, I'm a DBS customer, have been for 18 years. I would struggle to tell you the last time I went into a DBS branch. So I'm just curious, and I'm not picking on Piyush, but I'm just curious, out of anybody here that has a bank account from DBS, or doesn't matter, OCBC, anybody else, you go to the branch? Okay.
I've had to make so many trips to the branch in Singapore. It's unbelievable.
To sign a form in order to get online banking? Yeah, okay. Okay, well, so I think this idea that I'm a believer that for sure, let's call it generally AI, we can call it something more specific, but in general, automation, AI will be a great job eliminator, right? I'm also a believer that there will be new things created. The only question is the asymmetry. How many are eliminated before how many are created? And if you eliminate 5 and you create 2, that's asymmetric. So I think these are challenges that we have to keep being honest about. The question isn't, do we fear it? The question is anticipate. And okay, I accept the point about empathy. Let's let doctors interact with patients instead of, doing things that tools could help improve so they have more time for patients. Kelvin, you've got something.
No, I think actually from the EDB standpoint, when we did a scan of most studies, actually many studies are suggesting that AI and technology will actually create more jobs than destroy. I mean, it's just the asymmetry. They will create jobs that are actually a lot more demanding and actually require a different set of skills that actually the current workforce do not have. So that's the main challenge. Otherwise, actually, we'll create. I mean, in a sense, we can all sense it ourselves. With emails and internet, who has become more free? We've all become more busy, right? So it's like crazy. I cannot imagine. I mean, I'm not really looking forward to that AI world where actually it's going to be a lot 10x more busy than we are today. But otherwise, I think generally there's a sense that actually it will actually create more jobs. It will destroy the old ones. And actually, lots of studies from McKinsey are saying that most of the jobs are not entirely replaceable, only parts of the job. So you will have a redesign of jobs, and then you will create new ones. And then the challenge is how do we adapt? So adaptability is actually one of the key things.
Steve, do you mind me just to add something that someone told me this in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago. So we were having this conversation, which is, what's going to happen to us, basically. And you go to San Francisco and you're scared because the way they present things is like, oh my gosh, this is happening. And you would feel so far back. It's like even Singapore being so aware of what needs to be invested in technology. You go to San Francisco, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going back, I'm losing my job. No one knows it, but it's coming. This is how you feel. And the guy, he's a professor at Berkeley, and he said this. He said, the problem is we're basing our assumption of what we know of work today, which is we should work 40 hours a week, except for French, because they work 35 hours a week. But I think they kind of figure it out, because the reality is maybe we shouldn't be working 38 hours or 40 hours a week. Maybe the economy should be based on something different. Maybe machine actually can free more time for us to be more creative at doing other things. So we base the assumption that we're going to be losing our jobs as we know it today, but maybe the future is just rethinking what it means to work, and the whole economy could be based on something different than just GDP and being able to work 40, 45 hours a week.
Sorry, on a lighter note, I just wanted to add to Jess's point. She said San Francisco, I would say go to China and see the innovation there. I mean, they are far beyond US in many, many aspects. So that's...
In deployment of AI would be one example.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, you can walk into a mall today and you can just scan yourself and you can try anything there. You don't really have to touch anything or feel. You just have to feel the cloth or whatever you want to buy. You just have to feel it. How does it feel? But if you want to try it on, how does it fit you? How does it, like, to the perfect size? So that's the innovation which AI is bringing in today, which means, I mean, I wanted to add to everybody's point here. AI is an enabler. It's not something which is there to take all the jobs away, right? It's more about enabling people to live a easy and hassle-free life, and people can do more and get better at doing things, right?
I don't know. I'm still, I'd love to see it. I've heard lots of people say, we're all going to be enlightened and we're going to use our free time to study the history of art and learn a third language. I struggle to see it in that same sense because what I see is a lot of entrepreneurs, but I'm a believer that there will be assistance. Let me use briefly my oldest girl as an example. Genetics counseling, she works with patients all day on trying to interpret the panels that doctors order and what does it mean in terms of your genetic sequence and what you might need to do as you continue to go forward, fertility, health problems, and so on. What she says is, I cannot wait, and she's moving to San Francisco, I cannot wait to work with some of these startups to build tools that automate a lot of what I have to do today that I don't want to do so that I can spend time with the patient. And I spent today 2 hours writing up notes and preparing case files. I would love to just spend time with the individual. So she is bring AI on as quickly as possible because it's an assistant. Other areas, if you're a paralegal and you're worrying about reviewing case files for a senior attorney, that may be a little less long-term in nature. Let me move on to some of these things. Universities historically were thought of as places for intellectual growth, became sort of in medieval times a place where you pursued knowledge and you could be an advisor to the elite class, so to speak, that was ruling. Now we often think of them as job preparation academies. What do I learn in a university that helps me get a good job? How do we think of being ready for the young men and women? We have an example here in the front row of a young man that will be going into the workforce in 10 or 12 years. What's the role of education? I'm not going to pick on universities per se. What's the role of education in preparing young men and women for this employability in 10 or 12 years' time? Anyone?
I mean, that's kind of very close to what we do, and I think universities, as the example, we just need to adapt and be faster. You know, there's a lot of red tape around how often universities, for example, or registered training organizations all around the world can update their curriculum. So there is a really big disconnect that we find from people who finish a degree and go into the workforce. Like, the skills aren't being taught. I think that we're starting to see universities, come up to speed a lot more. So there's a lot of innovative programs where they're running kind of like boot camp style education to try and close that gap. But yeah, I think the whole industry just has to move with the pace of change, which is going to be very hard.
So more bite-sized package. When you think about education in the future, Kelvin, do you think about universities still playing the same role they do today? We need 10,000 more accountants or 10,000 more attorneys, or do universities go back to what they were historically, a place to learn great things and then you build skills for employment through other sources?
Actually, and this is my personal view, I struggle with that. I was just talking in office today, where I was just sharing that about 20 over years ago when I was back in UK in university, we were already talking about silicon photonics, the use of, instead of electronic signals in the IC circuit, we use light, photon waves, right? That was 20 over years ago. It's only beginning to creep into the industry right now on the commercial level. So, I mean, just to connect with this conversation, I mean, there's a role that universities and research universities they have to play. They have to advance technology, and I suppose the fundamentals that they teach in the kids will allow them to build that kind of capabilities to do research. But I totally agree with John. In most of the universities today, they take a long time to actually roll out curriculum, right? Because there's a certain methodology, and by the time they roll it out, it's irrelevant. So most of us will have this comment saying that, most of everything that we're studying in university, by the time we graduate, the skills are all irrelevant, which is generally true. So maybe university is about teaching them life skills, but in terms of job skills, we have to depend on, we have to work more closely with the industry.
Does anyone have a question that they just wanted to shout? Because a lot of the ones on Slido I can sort of gather into 2 or 3 topics. Anybody just want to throw a hand up and shout a question if you're so inclined? Yes, please.
So question to Kelvin. So with regards to Singapore's competitiveness in the region, how do you see things in terms of, Indonesia, they have a population of 200 or so million, Malaysia, Philippines, young population, very hungry, and technology is dispersed. How can Singapore be competitive in that type of environment?
Can you just do me a favor, just for those that may not have been able to hear at the back, can you just sort of paraphrase Singapore remaining competitive against larger, younger, hungrier, and the role of sort of in tech savvy?
You just said it.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's fine, great, thank you. No, I think it is something that we have to deal with in terms of Singapore's existence all throughout our lives. I mean, we have never been big, we have always been small, we have always been lacking in any natural resources, which kind of gives Singapore the DNA of paranoia, of knowing that us doing well is not something that we can take for granted for. No, and to some extent, we are trying to leverage the fact that Singapore today is still an attractive home where people want to kind of put their families in, put their lives, spend most of their careers in. And I think the thing about Singapore is that we have a very strong concentration of both large international companies and interesting startups. And I think in that complexity, in that strong concentration of such diversity, something interesting can happen. And one of the things that Singapore today still stand out versus some of these economies is that the things that we do, we try to serve the regional and the global economy. It's not just about the Singapore economy, because we do not have one. I mean, there's no domestic economy to speak of. There's only mom and pop shops, but there's nothing much here in terms of domestic economy. So all the things that we do is with the region or the global market in mind. So we are hoping to build on that, and we are trying our best to attract the best people from all around the world, including from the region, to make this place their home, their base. And like you said, the region is a huge region, and most companies find it relatively tough. So, I mean, there is a saying in another industry, we will try to find the commonalities, as common as possible, and then deal with the differences at the edges. So it's like, because if everything is different, it's very hard for any enterprise to deal with. So hopefully Singapore can play the role of finding the commonalities in the ASEAN region and play that role.
Are there other questions? Thank you for that one. Are there other questions from the floor? Yes, please.
I'd like to ask the panel if they believe in this phrase called war for talent, which seems to be bandied around a lot. I mean, Joe, I'm with you in that I think there are, you've got skills and knowledge. I think knowledge in general, unless you're trying to be a brain surgeon or something, generally knowledge in the corporate context can be learned, but skills are things that people generally tend to evolve over time. So do we believe that there is a genuine war for talent, or is it self-inflicted because employers keep looking for that, candidate that ticks all the boxes and can start the job from day one?
I think there definitely is a war for talent. We're seeing that in companies, but the problem with that is that it's a zero-sum game. So the only people who are going to benefit out of that are recruiters and the talent that's jumping from place to place. So there definitely is a war for talent, but again, the only way I think we solve for that is to bring new talent into the equation. So whether that's through training or Singapore brings a lot of talent in from overseas. Yeah, I think that there definitely is a problem.
I mean, I think just to extend the point a little bit as well, when I first started working for a tech company, the company saw that its responsibility was to help invest in and develop people that were coming in. And so I was a beneficiary of working. They sent me all around the world. I went to lots of different things, had mentors. I think nowadays, at least my perspective, is that a lot of companies are looking for more fully formed human beings that sort of join to your earlier point about being able to hit the ground day one. I'm sure I was relatively useless in the first year of my company because I was just sort of learning. But boy, I learned a lot. And so that was, I don't know if that's a different time. I mean, IBM, to pick a big tech company, was very famous for structured, long-term investing, and frankly, the payback was they had people that stayed for 20 plus years. Maybe that's a good thing, and maybe it's not, I don't know. But this idea of looking for somebody, so Ved, when you take a look for somebody, do you look for a fully formed human being, or do you say, hey, I'm going to have to invest in this person and help them learn the right way?
So two advices which I give my hiring managers. I do a lot of consulting work with my hiring managers. So one is look for people who can replace you in the next few years. Don't look for people who can do the job. Look for people who can replace you so that you can do better things and more. So that's one. Second is in terms of the talent, what you are looking at is people who are generally. So there are two things which I do, which is skill and potential, right? So there's skill to match with. There are few things which are must-have. You look at must-have things and few things which are good to have. So look for good to have, look for potential. So that's the coaching which we need to do as recruiters, as talent acquisition leaders. That's one thing which we want to drill down to every manager, every hiring manager or the leader in the company to ensure that they look for potential, at the same time are okay to do trade-off in terms of skills, in terms of matching the fully born or fully developed adult or human being to be able to do this job, right? So you're basically, what is the trade-off and why do you need it? And have those kind of conversations with the hiring managers or the leaders. That's more useful than just going with, okay, this is what my manager wants, this is what I need to hire for, and you're not adding a lot of value there. You're just basically doing a paper pusher's job. So that's what my take is.
So Jess, let me come back, because as Chief Happiness Officer, talk to us for a minute, because in this war for talent, people have choice, and people want to work for places. Some people are mission and purpose-led. They want to work for somebody that they believe aligns with their values and so on. So how do you think about retaining great talent and attracting more great talent? And how does the role that you hold help encourage that? How does your team think of that?
I think Ved touched a very important point, which is a lot of us recruiters and HR professionals, we are not trained well enough to spot talents besides beyond your resume. So you don't fit what we're looking for, then we were just moving along, which is terrible, I know that. But we lack of training, a lot of us lack of training to understand what's beyond that. And as for hiring people and retaining talent, I think it's very much down to what are the scorecards of the organization. So when you are a smaller company, it's usually easier to define the culture of the organization. And if you have a strong culture within your organization, you usually know what's important in terms of skills. And you're right, there are hard skills you won't be able to not to have. If you're looking for a programmer, you might as well know how to code, because otherwise it's going to be a really, really, really tough year. But there are things, realistically speaking, that we would be looking at hiring. There are people who would be looking at hiring that really don't fit everything we would like to have. But we manage our expectation as an organization, and I think that's the role of HR professionals as well, to speak to CTOs, to speak to the board of directors, to educate people on the fact that, yes, it would be amazing to have another Steve Jobs type of personality within the organization, but we're not going to be able to attract those people, first, because there aren't plenty of them, and the second thing is, there are plenty of other amazing companies that can have them for more money, for more freedom, for more flexibility, and they can work freelance and work for other companies as well, and plenty of them. That's the future as well, of work as well. We need to consider, which is, do people want to work for one company, or do they want to do different things for different companies? So I think it's very much down to the culture, understanding what's important for your organization. Is it purely the dollar value? Then yes, you can attract people and give them high salary and great perks, and they will stay with you for how long? For as long as they feel challenged and until the next employer comes around and gives 20% more salary, which happens all the time. Or you can redefine what it means for you to build an organization with your employees, and it doesn't matter whether it's a small company or a big company. As long as you are clear about the vision of the organization, the scorecards of the organization, and what it really means. And what it really means is sometimes to say no to people who are amazing on paper, but it's just not a fit for your organization. And it's hard to do on a recruitment standpoint, to say no to amazing people. But it's something you need to understand as well as an organization, that the great talents are not the best talents usually.
Are there other questions from the floor? Yes, please.
So this is like a
We'll get a mic.
This is like a two-parter with a little side note. I do appreciate your perspective on the whole automation. I'm not as sanguine on the whole automation destroying jobs versus creation, and the symmetry in particular. We get the jobs are coming, but how fast are they coming? So I appreciate that. So the first question is, Jonathan, I think you very briefly mentioned the whole becoming more human, just kind of as a way to kind of forestall automation, potentially either destroying jobs or altering them too significantly. And I guess I just wanted you to go more into the whole empathy aspect, possibly other aspects. And the second question is, how prominent do you think that open source is going to be going into 2030 and beyond? Like, do you think that this trend towards more open source is just something that's going to die off, or just thoughts, I guess?
I guess on the first part, just diving a little deeper into the becoming more human aspect. I think that it really comes down to, that's the only way that we can differentiate ourselves in a future where everything is automated and everything is AI, which they're painting. So I think one of the challenges there, one of the main challenges for people is how do you, A, develop those skill sets, and then B, how do you sell yourself with those skill sets? I mean, it's hard to just go into an interview, and you can probably add to this, Jess, and be like, I'm a totally empathetic person. Here's my portfolio on empathy and how I run. But I think, data is going to help us get closer to the customer. So everything is moving towards a really customer-centric model where companies need to understand their customer, really, really well. And I think that's where, that's where these soft skills, is empathy and things like that, are going to come into play, and are going to be vital and important for companies to, I guess, differentiate themselves from their competitors. On the open source model, I might pass that.
Yeah, Vin.
I think one word answer, yes, open source will stay. It's here to stay, and it's going to add a lot of value. In terms of what innovation can bring, I mean, if there was no open source, a lot of these products wouldn't have been possible today. So that's open source for you. So it's going to stay, and it's going to be here for long.
My sense is, if you take a look, domain is really the key differentiator that we would argue, which is you find available algorithms. So our argument as a team, as SGInnovate, is not so much if an entrepreneur comes, I have a much better algorithm than anything available. We're less interested than I have access to better quality data, better annotated data. I know the domain very well. I understand the problems of that domain very well. And I can sort of pull algos off the shelf. So our view would generally be open source more as opposed to proprietary, just as an editorial comment. There was another question, please? Yes.
Thanks, Steve. So my question is around this war for talent, right? So yes, there's some trainings are happening to address the needs of the industry. But if you really see what is happening across industry, right from media, telecom, and now banking, and other industry will join soon, every organization is basically going to become a digital company, which means there is going to be a huge need of digital enabled and supporting talent. Right now, there is very few people who are actually trained in that space. And most of the company want, as you mentioned, fully formed human beings, right? If they're not willing to invest, from where we are going to fill up this gap? And I would like to understand from your perspective how big gap you see if all this industry which are just going to join this digital bandwagon now, in 3 to 5 years, what is going to be the scale of gap?
Unfortunately, I mean, I don't have a number in terms of the, sizing the gap. So for sure, yes, we are running, the supply is running after the demand. But I think one of the things that is going for us is that actually Singapore, we have always been, from the education, the government planning in terms of education, we've always consciously steered more of the vacancies, polytechnics and universities to engineering, science, and things like that. So, it's not so obvious to everybody, but actually a good percentage, I think about 50% of our total graduates are from those areas. So in terms of raw supply, I think there's some. And I think in all our efforts with IMDA, with EDB, all the efforts that we have with companies, there's so much focus on getting the companies to do that additional training. So hopefully that kind of bring us a little bit closer, but you're right, we don't have extra supply. But even things like, for example, the government now setting up, the army setting up a new cybersecurity defense unit. Yes, it's for national interest, but hey, look, what that's going to build over time is actually a very strong partner of cybersecurity people.
I would just add that if you survey CEOs around the world, and it's been done many times, like this problem is at the forefront of their thinking. It's where am I going to get this talent for as we undergo our digital transformation? And I think the gap's going to widen as new companies and you kind of tier down to smaller companies which are also undergoing that. So companies are starting to think about it, and we're seeing in the industry a lot of them thinking pretty creatively about it. So training is probably at the forefront of that. It's, I might have a whole bunch of workers that we know are going to lose their jobs in the next 3 years, but these are good workers with institutional knowledge. They know the companies. They're good employees. How can we shift them over into the roles that we need to fill? So that's definitely something that we're seeing. We're getting asked about all the time.
Another question? I have time for, let's say, 1 or 2, and then I'm going to try and...
Yeah, adding to the point of data, AI, and all that, how does certification play a role here? I mean, like 5 years back, there was like a very few certification, There was like when you do a certification on that, you clearly get a job. But now if there are a lot of ad push every day in the mobile, I'm from Berkeley University, I'm from this university, you can do analytics in my university, in other universities and all. So how do we actually validate which one is the best one in terms of data or something?
Do you mind if I take this one?
Please, go ahead.
So it's probably the question we get the most nowadays, which is, okay, should I invest in an MBA? Should I invest in another master? Or should I go back to university and take another bachelor in engineering? I have seen the trend changing quite a lot over the last 10 years. Before, for companies, if you didn't have that right degree from that brilliant university, then it would probably be a no-go. But nowadays, it's so irrelevant to look at the bachelor degree or the master degree. We, in technology, we actually don't care. We recognize it's great to have if you have had someone who committed 5 years, to a master. So it tells something about you. But we are more interested in certification from Coursera, from Udemy, from Pluralsight, for MIT. So all those institutions giving 6 weeks, 6 months, a year certification that you can take online. We are much more interested in understanding why you took those certifications, what you have learned from them, than just the master or the bachelor degree. But again, I'm not saying don't go to university. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is education is one of those industry that hasn't been disrupted much over the last 60 years. And I am a strong believer in unbundling services. And I think education needs to be unbundled. And being unbundled is through, again, those certifications that are online certification and really, really great certifications to get for the technology industry.
I'll just add that we get this question all the time, right? It's like, I come to General Assembly, how am I going to stack up against a degree? I would say because of the war for talent, companies can't be as picky, for one, so they look for other ways to assess candidates. And mostly what we see is it comes down to portfolio and experience, right? So these are programs, as you mentioned, it'd be a rough year for a programmer who couldn't program, right? You're going to fail pretty quickly. Like, it's pretty obvious if you can't do it. So throughout the whole interview process, they'll test you to make sure that you can actually do the role, and that is much more important from what we're seeing, than a piece of paper that says you can do it.
And I think it also is contextual. I mean, it depends on who the company is, right? If you're going to go apply to Bain or McKinsey, it might matter, and I'm not offending any of my friends there. But if you're working for a startup, it sure doesn't matter, right? It's what you can do. I mean, a startup, somebody who's trying to build a company cares a lot more about what you can do than what you studied in university. So I think it depends the context as opposed to, do or don't do, get or don't get. Was there a question at the back, please? Yes.
Hi. Being a woman who helps lots of women find jobs, and particularly in tech, one of the questions that I have is how come that we're talking about having issues to attract and retain women, and still we have a massive issue with maternity leaves and having people who have taken breaks and trying to come back to work, even though they might have taken General Assembly courses or any other courses, and still, for some reason, HR and hiring managers don't want to hire them. What are your thoughts about this? And as companies and as a country, what are the actions that you are taking to overcome this issue?
Jess, I hope I'm not offending, but you look like you might be thinking about this issue.
Strange enough, I'm probably the stereotype of a woman working in HR. So it tells a lot on how we haven't involved in a women type of position as well. So male don't have that much access to those jobs as well. So it's not just female not having access to tech roles. I think you're right. The problem is much deeper than we thought it was. So we used to think, oh, we don't have the 50-50% ratio. But nowadays, we're thinking about it more in terms of innovation. We think that not having enough women within the organization actually limits your ability to innovate. So it's not just about ratio anymore. We recognize that women have skills that men don't have, and vice versa. And the only way it's going to work is to attract those women. But again, as I said, the shortage of talent is not just having great programmers. It's recognizing that women are not being involved in the conversation when it comes to choosing careers in tech or IT. And but the Singaporean government does a lot of things going in that sense. GA, the fact that they train people in 3 months and they have the same access to the job market as male, it's fantastic. So it means that you don't have to wait those 5 years to get women joining the technology workforce. But it's a much deeper conversation that companies like Microsoft and Facebook are having at the moment. I'm not sure if you remember a few months back, Facebook, again, unfortunately for them, did something they shouldn't have done, which is posting jobs. They were posting jobs through an AI system, and the job was basically targeting male viewers. And no one knew about it until it was too late. So it was just the machine that was programmed this way. But you see, it's a bigger conversation to have. So at the moment, we don't have enough female joining the workforce. But what happens if you and I don't even see those jobs? Because they are being posted on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever the portal, and we don't even see them because the machine is programmed this way. So again, it's a sad conversation, but a very interesting one to have.
So there's interesting discussion about bias in AI. That would be a good thing for us to explore. We've explored it before. It would be another good thing to explore another time. But let me come back to the specific question about maternity leave. And John, if I can just ask, I mean, I would assume, I hope I'm not wrong, that some of the portability of skills helps go as one answer, meaning that if a woman is taking time away for maternity and maternity leave, to the extent that there's a skill such as something that involves programming, then it doesn't matter where you are, meaning you can do this from wherever you are. You don't have to then be off maternity leave and sitting back in an office. So is it a function of how do we continue to also think about skills that allow a more flexible workforce, male or female, but in this particular context, female?
And I would say I think tech probably does a better job at it than other industries, and it probably does come down to the fact that they can stay tapped in, to the role and to the workforce while on maternity leave. And it also raises another a point that often comes up when we talk about the future of work, which is, the idea that remote work is going to become so much more prevalent, and the concept of cities, not so much in Singapore because it's geographically pretty small, but in other regions, the concept of cities is something that might not be around in the future. Regional towns might explode more because of the fact that people can work from anywhere. And I'd say one of the main draw cards for tech that we see for people coming into this field is this perception that they can work remotely from a beach, or it's not entirely true. It's pretty romanticized, but you can. And software, collaboration software is growing hugely. So things like Zoom, look how widely successful that was last week, are really enabling this. So I think that'll go ways to solve that problem, but by no stretch is it going to completely.
Yeah, I mean, my son is an example. He is a scuba instructor. He is also a guy that writes algorithms, and he will never sit in an office in the same way that I've sat in an office. So when he goes on a dive trip, his laptop is with him, and he'll spend 3-4 hours doing this. He'll go for a dive. He'll spend 2 hours doing that. Then he won't do anything for a day. So, I mean, he has a skill, and that allows him to pursue his life in the way that he is excited about that. So I'm sort of a believer that this idea of if you have something that people need, you then can set a whole different set of rules than if you have to show up and fit a particular defined JD. We have to draw to a close because part of what we always want to do is leave time for people to have a chance to introduce each other that would like to learn something from another person. So here's what I'd like to summarize. I think that the idea of employability, we've come back to the more human, the more empathetic, because if we're trying to compete so-called head-on with automation, we're unlikely to win. People that think that we can sort of beat back the machine, but the idea of saying what are those things that make us different and valuable. Number two is education will evolve. The way that we've defined education, you go to university to learn how to be an accountant may not be the thing. Learning how to be more of a whole person, critical thinking, analytics, understanding philosophy, and computer may be an interesting intersection because AI and ethics, boy, if we think we need skills, social thinking is going to be ever so important. We sort of moved it away because we loved computer, and now we think, gosh, we better think about the social impact. And then I guess finally, the idea that there's lots of tools and capabilities at your disposal, whether it's GA or lots of other people. There's lots of ways to learn new things in this sort of unbundled way that Jess mentioned. So what I'd like to do is just summarize by saying thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for coming tonight, and let's keep the conversation going.